Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, once I had recovered from the shock of finding myself on this panel and not the one I signed up for, I thought I would put some thoughts together. There is a written text which I prepared primarily as a courtesy for the translators, and it was also emailed to you last night. I have been inundated with your out-of-office replies, which is not surprising because you are all here. I find myself in the unfortunate position of disagreeing with one of our keynote speakers last night. Ambassador Superstein concluded his remarks by being somewhat disparaging about the place of history and the role of history. What I hope to do in a very brief presentation today is to talk about the possibility that we can learn from the past and informed by the past we can create a better future. I want to tell my story, I want to tell England's story, and I hope that when I conclude you will all share in that and it will become our story. My story for the last 2 years is of travelling throughout the world, talking on a subject dear to my heart, namely Magna Carta, in its 800th anniversary year. My journey has taken me to America, to Australia, to Africa, and throughout most of Europe. I am embarrassed at the extent of my carbon footprint. But England's story is of the document Magna Carta, which I've discussed and written about in this book, and which has been celebrated this year throughout the world in different ways. Magna Carta is a pragmatic peace treaty, negotiated on the banks of the River Thames on the 15th of June of 1215. But it has become the iconic bedrock of fundamental constitutional principles throughout the common law world and beyond. It articulates the rule of law, trial by jury, habeas corpus, and much more besides. And it is afforded a reverence by constitutional lawyers and by others, not so much because of its historic reality, but because of the mythical recollection that people have. Its origins may be clouded in a level of misunderstanding, but we must remember that today it carries enormous weight because of what it said and what it is believed to have said. At the launch of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, Eleanor Roosevelt famously remarked that that very document, that modern-day articulation of human rights, constitutes a Magna Carta for modern times. And Magna Carta is a wonderful mixture, a mixture of high-vaulted principle and detailed specificity. A little bit like this very conference, where we have contributions dealing with broad areas of theory, and others like mine, which focus on a much narrower area. And we must bear in mind that it was the churches, it was Archbishop Stephen Langton, and it was several other bishops who were responsible for negotiating the terms of Magna Carta and for preparing that written text. And it was not unique. Throughout Western Europe at the time, there were similar charters which dealt with the relationship between the ruled and the ruler, the government and the citizen. The original Magna Carta contained the following clause: all evil customs relating to forests are to be investigated in every county by 12 sworn knights of the country, and within 40 days of their inquiry, the evil customs are to be abolished completely and irrevocably. That clause is not contained in the subsequent reiterations and reissues of Magna Carta. The reason is not because the clause was unimportant, but because the theme reflected in that clause, amplified, strengthened, expanded, and legitimated, was contained in a separate document, the Charter of the Forest, sealed on the 6th of November of 1217, 798 years ago. That document, that Charter of the Forest, was overshadowed by its more famous companion Magna Carta and was consigned to obscurity. But I want to suggest that that document was of enormous importance in its time and is of equal importance today. It deals with the rights of the common man as opposed to the privilege of barons, and it expresses those rights in a far more meaningful way than Magna Carta. It irrevocably altered English land law, and it endured for longer than Magna Carta. It remained in force as part of English law until it was repealed as recently as 1971. That Charter of the Forest re-established rights for free men which had been eroded by William the Conqueror. Royal forests, they included heathland, farms and villages. Approximately 1/3 of the English countryside was classified as being a royal forest. But the Charter gave to the ordinary citizen the right to forage for food, the right to graze their animals. The king was required to give up possession of huge areas of land and to return it to use by commoners living in their community. The Charter was very detailed. The Charter was very schematic. And just as Magna Carta was the foundation of modern-day human rights, so the Charter of the Forest is an early and sophisticated expression of the modern concept of communitarian stewardship of the Earth's resources. And it is in a language and it is in a form dictated by the Church for the benefit of the people. The clauses include the following: every free man shall lodge in the forest if he wishes. Henceforth, every free man in his wood or on his land has the right to make a mill, to create a fish reserve, a pond or ditch, to cultivate land, to provide arable pasture, provided, and here is the important proviso, provided no injury is thereby given to any neighbour. A very advanced and a very nuanced expression of individual rights, and yet rights which are deferential to neighbours and to others living in community. And as an example of further detail, there's a further clause which says, every free man shall have the right to the honey found in his woods. Well, what better expression of right could one wish for than that? The forests had been hunting grounds, sources of revenue for the monarch, and interference with those rights had been the source of particularly hard punishment. It was said of one monarch that he used little discrimination in his public punishments between deer killers and murderers of people. But that was also changed by the Charter of the Forests. Clause 10 reads as follows: no one shall henceforth lose life or limb because of our venison, but if anyone has been arrested and convicted of taking venison, he shall be fined heavily if he has the means, and if he has not the means, he shall lie in prison for a year and a day. Special courts were set up to ensure that the rights articulated in the Charter were brought into full effect. And therefore, as authority passed from the king to the local communities, it was done in a way which did not cause disadvantage to any neighbour. This charter demonstrated the principle of localism, the principle of subsidiarity, and most importantly, the principle of sustainable development. And it did so 8 centuries before they became part of today's political agenda. And the churches, maybe for mixed motives, were the driving force between this important social revolution. King Henry, when he obtained his majority, agreed to uphold Magna Carta and at the same time agreed to uphold the Charter of the Forests. The two became linked in the public consciousness, and the two were thereafter published as a single joint document. Magna Carta has lived on in political history. The Charter of the Forests, regrettably, has been consigned to past memory and to the forgotten world. My call today is that in the same way that we treat the civil rights of Magna Carta as essential to the well-being and the flourishing of any civic society, is that we recapture, reenact and bring back to life the principles of the Charter of the Forest. We have 2 years before the 800th anniversary of this chapter, of this charter, and it seems an appropriate time that we mark that significant anniversary by, with renewed vigour, taking care of the need for sustainable communities and taking care of property held in community for the good of all. When I spoke to Brett Shafts yesterday, a friend and colleague for many years, and told him I was going to address you on a medieval charter now long forgotten, his eyes glazed over and the colour drained from his face. I would like to think that this charter is a forerunner of those 17 sustainable goals. It's as relevant now as it ever was, and I invite all of you to be the accelerants in bringing it back into the public consciousness. Thank you very much.